Some tragic news out of Houston. A mass shooter entered Pastor Joel Osteen's megachurch on Sunday and opened fire during the Spanish language service. One man was shot in the leg and has been released from the hospital, while terribly a 7-year-old boy was shot in the head and is in critical condition. The shooter was then shot and killed by 2 off-duty police officers. Now, police have not released an official motive, though following the shooting, details have emerged about the shooter's political views and potential gender identity circulating around social media. We're not saying the shooter's name, but it is available elsewhere in the media if you want to go looking for it. According to police, they said the shooter used both male and female aliases to refer to herself, which has led to some speculation about having gender identity. It was also confirmed by the authorities that a Palestine sticker on the gun she used to carry out the attack was on the gun. Now, conservative commentator Libs of TikTok wrote on X, quote, Colorado Springs shooter, non-binary, Nashville school shooter trans, Aberdeen school shooter trans, Denver school shooter trans, Iowa school shooter trans, gender fluid, Lakewood church shooter trans. The modern LGBTQ plus movement is radicalizing our youth into becoming violent extremists, to which Congressman Thomas Massie responded, we should be able to know which government-approved license sanctioned drugs were used at the time. Additionally, it came to light that beyond the Palestine sticker, the shooter had a cache of anti-Semitic writing and a history of criminality and mental health issues. Per ABC News, the past of the suspected Lakewood shooter includes a turbulent marriage, a contentious divorce, allegations of child and spousal abuse, a checkered criminal record, and a well-documented history of mental health issues. And in fact, the boy who was shot in the head is the son of the shooter. So I think the trans speculation on social media has gotten kind of ahead of itself here, because the using multiple aliases, that maybe that's a gender identity thing. That might just be a crime thing. This is a person with a pervasive mental health, criminal record, and the political sentiment might be genuine. The Palestine sticker. NBC was suggesting that the divorce, her husband's family is Jewish, and the anti-Semitic writings, and there might be some genuine Jewish animus. Although, again, from my point of view, always when there are we like to ascribe, and I say this when it's on both sides, we like to ascribe political motivations, and I end up being somewhat skeptical when most of these crimes being committed by deeply psychologically unwell people, maybe latching on to whatever is the most politically salient thing at the moment, but not really being part of some committed ideology. This is a terrible situation, and I'm sure a lot of questions are going to be asked about how this person had access to a weapon, and then we can probe their thinking more, I suppose.
Well, we do know that the shooter had legally purchased an AR-15. She also had this .22 caliber weapon in her bag that was not used in the attack. Texas has notoriously lenient gun laws, and given that there had been all of these red flags, if you will, about her past history, both with crime and mental illness, I think that's the really big question here, is how did she get her hands on? I'm sorry, they're being referred to as she by the press. It seems like that was the most recent identity that she had used. They're referring to some of these others as aliases that she used previously, as opposed to kind of a gender identity issue. This is not really clear, so excuse me, I might correct that going forward. But I do think the gun possession issue, the clear mental health issue, and the past crime issue are all raising some really important questions about how they were in this position in the first place.
Right. This person had an existing criminal record.
Exactly.
Which, again, even people who support gun rights and the Second Amendment generally believe you can restrict guns to people with criminal records.
And moreover, although the gun was purchased legally, so before or after some of these criminal events took place, or are the gun laws really that lax in Texas that the kind of crimes that they committed didn't rise to the level that would have precluded?
Or is whatever the process was not followed, or the proper search wasn't performed,
but it was a legal gun purchase, right? So that we do know. And to your earlier point about these kinds of things getting weaponized, I mean, the Libs of TikTok post, the Thomas Massie post, it's important to keep in mind that According to a report that was done last summer after the last trans shooter attack, it examined 173 attacks in the U.S. that resulted in harm to 3 or more individuals, trying to narrow down what counts as a mass shooting. I know that you've quibbled about that a little bit, but this is how they've done it, just as transparency. Of those 173 attacks, 3 attackers were trans, assigned female at birth, but were known to identify as male at the time of the attacks. 3 out of those 174.
Yeah.
The U.S. Secret Service National Threat Assessment Center, which studies all form of targeted violence, including mass casualty attacks, published a report that went from 2016 to 2020 and found that nearly all attackers, or 96% of the study, were male, and the remaining 5 attackers were female. So I do think it's important to keep that into context as people are trying to whip up fear about trans shooters at the same time that just yesterday, I think it was yesterday or this week, a trans teenager was stabbed 14 times at a party in the UK and had slurs shouted at her, because this is the environment against trans people as well.
Well, but trans people are such a vanishingly small part of the population that even if it's only 3 people, I mean, that I don't know if that's, in keeping with the number of. With that might be a statistical outlier. I have to look more closely at the data, but
no, I think
there
that's
are
exactly what it
few...
indicates. That it can seem like there's a trans panic if you have 3 trans shooters, because there's so few. You know what I mean?
Like, but they could still be vastly. They could be statistically overrepresented in crime because there's so few trans people. Anyway.
I think that's what I'm saying. That's what the argument that I'm making about the trans shooters.
No, I'm saying it could be anomalous to even have 3 trans shooters, given what a small percentage of the population they are.
I feel like we're saying the same thing, but you mean it differently.
I feel like we're saying the opposite thing.
Okay, well,
Yeah, I mean, so men disproportionately...
Overwhelmingly.
Commit, yes, vastly disproportionate to their percentage of the population. For instance, like...
Almost exclusively.
Right, racial breakdowns don't really, there are more... rough, in terms of mass shootings at least, roughly correspond to how much of the population identifies as that race, right? You would Oh,
I'm not sure. I don't actually know about that.
No,
I'm
asserting that is the case.
Okay, sure.
People will say there was a couple mass shootings committed in a row by Asian people, the Virginia Tech, et cetera, and people are well, is there? But then if you looked, it was well, if Asian people are 7% of the population, then they should be 7% of the mass shootings, and it worked out to about that, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that's for black people and white people. But the statistical outliers are men versus women.
But that's what I'm describing, that you can have a couple of Asian mass shooters, and then suddenly everyone's asking questions like, what's going on with the Asians? In the same way that people can be asking questions about
I'm saying there are so few trans people, maybe there should be fewer than 1 on average trans mass shootings.
Right, but that doesn't change the point, Robby, that when you have very small numbers of people doing anything at all, if you have randomly something happen, it can seem like there's a pattern when that exists. Like, this was an issue for me during the this was after the 2016 campaign. There was this hit piece that came out, was written on Bernie, that said there is the black percentage of the prison population in Vermont is vastly overrepresented. Vermont's the whitest state in the country. And when you looked at the numbers, it was I'm making this up now, but for the sake of the argument, let's say there's 200 people in the jail, and 5 of them are black.
Right.
So it's it's like if they had pulled over, not 12 but 5 people driving through Vermont in a given period of time and arrested them, then you would have radically different numbers. So at a certain point, when the sample size is so small, it's hard to read any
right. But that's a little bit.
Of it.
That's also true of what you just brought up, the violence against transgender people, which.
Well, I'm not making
overwhelmingly.
But I'm not making any claims. All I'm saying is that a trans girl was stabbed in a bathroom, and that happened. I'm not projecting anything out of that. I'm just saying that trans people statistically are disproportionately affected by crime, hate, physical violence against them and sexual violence against them.
Because they're disproportionately likely to be involved in sex work and and drug activity and other risky activity. It's often framed as they're the victims of hate crimes and anti-trans bigotry, and when you look closer at those cases, overwhelmingly it's the reasons don't matter so much to me, because violence is violence and ought to be punished, but it's usually the result of
I think some of that's true. All I'm saying is that this was a 14-year-old girl who was stabbed at a roller skating party with friends. I don't think the allegation here is that she was a sex worker and that that's why she was targeted.
Well, I just always aim for some caution, including in this case where someone with a gun that says Palestine on it shot people and wrote a bunch of anti-Semitic. I'm sure a lot of people are going to, use that as this is going to be an example of violence by a leftist person against.
It's not hard to say that the whole point of the movement for Palestine is to stop innocent people from being killed, as they've been being killed for 75 years by the government of Israel. So taking a gun into a church and shooting up a bunch of people is obviously antithetical to the whole mission of freeing Palestine and having substantive Palestinian rights. So if this person wants to put a sticker on their gun, there's no harm and no hesitation for me to condemn that this person randomly, wantonly exercised violence against civilians, and that is the opposite of what the people who are supporting Palestine
But I don't need to blame
happen.
anybody else or anybody's rhetoric for this. This was a mentally ill person doing something, and it is on them, and we can probe what policies might have been in place to prevent it, but it is ultimately that person who bears responsibility, in my view. More Rising right after this.